Hi, everyone. Good evening and good morning, Professor Basu. It is a distinct privilege for me and for everyone at the Jindal Global University and Jindal Global Business School to welcome Professor Kaushik Basu to this special distinguished lecture for the Center for Research in Emerging Economies at JGBS. We often say in introducing people that the speaker needs no introduction. Now, if that is ever really true, it must be in this case. Nobody here really needs to be introduced to Professor Kaushik Basu. But just for the records, let me say what I suppose everybody knows. Professor Basu is the Karl Marx, C-A-R-L-M-A-R-K-S, professor of economics at the Cornell University. He's a former chief economic advisor at the government of India and the chief economist at World Bank. And of course, I have been privileged personally to know Professor Basu for a few decades now, off and on. We have not interacted continuously, but off and on. I remember going back about 25 years or longer ago, whereas students at IIM Ahmedabad, and I was lucky to have a few friends at Delhi School of Economics who were Professor Basu's students. And we used to steal some of his lectures by sitting in his classes in that big auditorium at DSE at that point. So we have always learned from Professor Basu, and although I was not a direct student of Professor Basu's, but managed to pick up things here and there, stolen knowledge, as they say. And of course, we know him as a great game theorist and as well as an extremely policy relevant scholar. His work on child labor is pretty seminal stuff, which has broken new ground and made a huge contribution. His work in development economics and welfare economics and game theory is fundamental now and essential reading anywhere. In the policy world, there is I remember the 1 year stint that Professor Basu did with, not 1 year, 3 year stint that he did with the Government of India as the chief economic advisor. I think the controversy that stemmed out of his suggestion about removing culpability of bribe payers led to very interesting discussion all over the country. And it obviously had very solid economic reasoning, but that was, as usual, did not get fully understood by the audience at that point. So one of the things that I have always carried with one of the pieces of wisdom of Professor Basu for policy practitioners is what he calls the extended Sen rule in his book. And he says, I'm just reading from his book right here, not only must each sentence of a policymaker or a policy communicator not convey a wrong meaning, there also should be no subsequence of words, no phrase, no clause in that sentence. In what one says, that conveys the wrong meaning. Everything you say, once you are in a policy world, can be and will be willfully misinterpreted, and that can land people into a lot of trouble. So as I said, I'm not going to stand for long between all of you and Professor Basu. The only thing that I would add before handing over the mic to Professor Basu and welcoming him again is that apart from being a great economist, Professor Basu is also a great humorist and a great artist. But I'm going to stop there and I'll invite Professor Basu to take over. Welcome, sir.
Rajesh, thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Chitrakalpo, with whom I was corresponding, who sent the invitation first, thank you very much. And just now I was talking with Anirban, Meenakshi, and Chitresh and Vikash, I think. So that was just very good. Thank you very much. I warned Rajesh and Chitrakalpo in my correspondence that, yes, I do wear two hats. But since this is a university, a top university, and actually it feels nostalgic for me because when I was chief economic advisor to Dr. Manmohan Singh, I visited your campus a couple of times, met people there. It's just wonderful. Given that I'm back on a campus, I like to go to places where I actually meet people in person, but that luxury we don't have. But I'm back on campus through Zoom. I thought I will take advantage and present to you some work that I'm doing currently, which is to do with group morality and the role of the leader in directing groups, done somewhat technically using light game theory, a very light game theory, and I will explain that to you as I'm doing it clearly enough. There's policy relevance, but it's not that what's happening today, what's happening tomorrow, it addresses that. So with that background, stay with me, despite the fact that it is a technical paper, but I will give you the conceptual ideas. The conceptual ideas, I think, are rich enough. In fact, I should tell you that Rajesh may remember, this used to be my old interest, and I will touch on that topic later. There was this very famous revolutionary document that had come out of Czechoslovakia during the days when Czechoslovakia was oppressed. It was under totalitarian control. One of the revolutionaries, Václav Havel, had written a document called The Power of the Powerless. Ordinary people's power, where does it come from? And the power of those at the top who appear very powerful, where does their power come from? It can't be that they have such strong muscles and so much strength that you're scared directly about what they will do. Their power is a more diffuse power. I had this paper by Václav Havel was an eye-opener for me, and it was one of the most, for me in my academic career, one of the most wonderful events, because it was in the early 1980s. I was visiting England briefly, and I had gone to Oxford to meet my PhD advisor, Amurto Sen. Amurto told me that, since you're here for dinner, you should, and you tell me that you have an interest in political power, you should sit next to Stephen Lukes at dinner and talk to him. And then during the conversation, this transpired. Stephen Lukes asked me about my interest. This was young me in my early days. I was very nervous. I told him that I wanted to understand political power. We economists pretend that does not exist. But we know, you look around, and today you're sitting in India, you can look around and see the power of the political leaders. I mean, needless to say, this is a power that is being exercised very unfortunately, but the power of the leaders you can see. What is that power? So Luke said that you will be interested that out of Czechoslovakia, we have just smuggled out a document which is written by a revolutionary. That time, Václav Havel was known as a revolutionary who was under house arrest in Czechoslovakia. Later, he would become president of the country. I had not heard of Havel, but he told me, Lukes, that we have got the document smuggled out of Czechoslovakia. He is sitting in prison and under house arrest. We are getting it translated into English, and I've got a first draft of the English. And this was the old-fashioned typed copy. And he gave me one of those copies. The paper subsequently came out. It became virtually a manifesto for the liberation of Czechoslovakia. But it was a paper written by a politician. But if you read it carefully, it's bristling with ideas which are virtual game theory. And a lot of game theory is nothing but intuition. It is true that there are parts of game theory which are very hard mathematical theorems, but a lot of very, very useful game theory is nothing but very good, fine, intuitive reasoning. That was about political power. That was my original interest in the subject. Next, it was last year that I began to work on, after I had done my term, 3 years as chief economic advisor in India. Then I was at the World Bank, came back to academics. I was thinking what I will work on, and I've been dabbling in various things. Then in 2019, early, I went to Delhi IIT. I went in, I think in March. I hope I'm not getting the month wrong. Very early in 2019, I went to Delhi IIT to give a public lecture. Something had happened just before that, which all of you will know. This was the Pulwama attack that took place against the Indian Central Reserve Police, where there was a terrorist attack. And this was completely peacetime, no provocation. Indian Central Reserve Police were going from Jammu to Kashmir. On the way, they were attacked, and more than 40 people, I think the one attacker and 40 Central Reserve Police people died. And of course, there was fury absolutely at this, and rightly so. There was one incident on television. This and a couple of other very, very practical matters took my mind to this problem. And so I'll just give you this very practical concern that had got me involved in this. And then I went on to write an academic paper, which I'm going to present to you. What happened was, after this attack, there was a television incident that some of you may remember. Navjot Singh Sidhu, one-time cricketer, great cricketer on television, was very critical, of course, as anyone would be, of this terrorist attack. But then he went on to say that, but for some people, even a group committing a dastardly crime, it would be wrong to hold each and every Pakistani as a criminal. This caused a furor that the moral responsibility for this crime should be borne by all Pakistanis. And Navjot Singh Sidhu tried to argue on television, but there was so much anger against him that he had to be taken off. In fact, the show, subsequently, he was taken off the television program. He was criticized that you're not holding the entire group to which these terrorists, Jaish-e-Mohammed was the terrorist group, you're not holding them responsible. From that arose a question in my head, that and other incidents, practical group moral responsibility. When do you hold a group morally responsible? If you say that if from within a group, if some people do something dreadful, the entire group is morally responsible, that causes me a problem. In other words, I have some sympathy with what Navjot Singh Sidhu was arguing. And again, to bring in just a piece of logic, if you say that given any group, if a subset of the group commits a crime, the entire group is responsible, then you could take a slightly bigger group. Why Pakistan? Take a bigger group, which is the Indian subcontinent, which includes India. Then you should say that the fact that Jaish-e-Mohammed committed this crime means Indians are morally responsible for this crime. Nepalis are morally responsible for this crime because the Jaish-e-Mohammed is part of the group, the Indian subcontinent. Clearly, there is something wrong with that. This was what was getting me into it. Then I started discovering. I gave a brown bag lunch to a philosophy group at Cornell, and it took off from that. I was then discovering, having begun commenting on the problem of group moral responsibility, that there was a big literature on this. And this is subsequent discovery, including some game theorists, some computer scientists. My colleague, Joe Halpern at Cornell, who's a top computer scientist, some of you will know of his work. He has, with a couple of co-authors, including with one of our students here, Meyer Friedenberg, a couple of papers on group moral responsibility. When a group behaves badly, how do you apportion the responsibility of the group's moral behavior, immoral behavior? Likewise, there are papers by Matthew Braham, Van Hess in the journal Mind, using game theory and addressing it. But to get you into the rhythm of the problem, I'll go back to a classic paper, one illustration from that, and then I will take you into a little bit of formalization. The paper that I'm referring to here, the paper quite some time ago, is 1969 in the Journal of Philosophy by Joel Feinberg. And there are subsequently papers by philosophers which are all roughly in the spirit of Feinberg's work. So let me tell you what the problem is. On a beach, on a sunny day, bunch of people are lying around sunbathing. When suddenly someone is drowning, one of the swimmers is drowning and screams out for support. Let us suppose that this is the situation. If everybody on the beach gets up, let's say that there are 10 of them. If each of them gets up and helps, all of them will have to do it. Then the drowning person will be saved. But if everybody does not get up and help, the drowning person will drown and die. Now, this is what happens. No one gets up, saying, what's the point of my getting up? It's the same voters paradox that on which there is a lot of writing. I don't get up, no point. I would like to get up. I don't want to save this person, but I can't do anything alone. Each person thinks like that. No one gets up, the person drowns. Are these people morally responsible? My general line has been, ever since I've been thinking of these examples, propensity to feel that we too readily give moral responsibility on too many people. And this is a very risky, philosophically, game theoretically, difficult and important question, because to spread the blame too generously on a group is wrong, and that can do damage. If one Black person commits a crime, if you hold all Black people responsible for it, you are indulging in wanton racism. You don't want to do that. On the other hand, and my own inclination, I'll tell you my psychological inclination, is to blame as little as possible. I do like to think of human beings as part of a machinery, as predetermined. You have to stop their wrong action. There are actions which are dreadful actions, and you may have to take every step to stop them. But my own instinct is you don't hold people morally responsible because we are determined creatures. But I'm not going to bring that perspective in over here. But I was going to point out that the line I instinctively take, that also can be dangerous. If you exempt everyone from moral responsibility because it is a group that has done it, then you may encourage bad behavior. Come back to Joel Feinberg's example. He more or less takes the line that you have to take these people responsible in the sense of tort law, that it is your responsibility, even if it's not quite a moral responsibility. I will draw attention to one problem over here, which should just alert you to the kinds of directions I will take you to. Strangely enough, the numbers matter. If this is a beach where 5 people are sunbathing and someone is drowning, and all 5 will have to get up to support, to save this person, and no one gets up, my instinct would actually take them, hold them responsible. Don't go into deeper questions of determinism and all that, put that aside. These people could have helped, they did not. I would hold them responsible. But if this was a beach with 100,000 people on the beach, and to save this person, you need everyone to get up and support, and everyone knows that, and no one gets up, my inclination would be you don't hold them morally responsible. It's quite reasonable to suppose that no one else is going to do it, and certainly not all the 100,000 people, so I better not do it, and no one does it, and the person drowns. These are the kinds of questions which trouble me. Having discovered that there is a big philosophy literature, when I started working on this paper, I flipped the problem around, and I got a rather exciting, tiny little game, which I'm going to put up on my blackboard. I will turn my screen just now for you to understand. The reason why I think the game attracted some attention, it's called the Samaritan's Curse. The game attracted some attention is because I was doing a slightly different question I was raising from what the bulk of the literature has raised. I was saying, if people from being selfish individuals, the way we, in economics, we assume all individuals are selfish. Start with selfish individuals. Let's convert people to moral creatures. If they become moral creatures, then will the outcome be more moral? And I managed to construct an example which is very simple, but I have to tell you, it took me an enormous amount of time to get it down to such simplicity. Initially, when I was constructing it, it was all over the place, but it was catching some attention. And I'm actually very pleased to tell you that this paper called The Samaritan's Curse was actually published just last week in the journal Economics and Philosophy. The paper is The Samaritan's Curse. Those who find an interest can take a look at that. Let me tell you what the paper does. I'm going to convert people from selfish standard economic agents to moral creatures and look at what happens to the moral outcome, which is the game of Samaritan's curse. And my paper, which is just published, is on that, and a brief discussion on what to do about it. Then I will go on to the role of the leader. Okay, I need my blackboard and to be able to see, in case the board is looking small on your screen, if you just pin my picture, it will become larger. Your computer screen will have it fully. So here it is. This is a two-player game. Even if you've never done game theory, don't switch off. I will explain what this is all about. You will understand. There is player one who has to choose between these rows, A, B, and C. And there is player two who has to choose between these columns, A, B, and C. After they have both made a choice, if player one chooses A, player two chooses C, the outcome is this box. Likewise, if player one chooses C, player two chooses B, the outcome is this box. And inside these boxes, I've written down the payoffs. That is the income that will be earned by each person. The left-hand figure number is what player one earns. The right-hand number is what player two earns. So if player one chooses A and player two chooses C, player one gets $108, player two gets $108. And let me take one more. Player one chooses C, player two chooses B. This is the outcome. Player one gets $102, player two gets $80 or rupees or whatever, or utils, units of utility. This is the income. Let me stay with dollars, that's the language I've used in the paper. Okay, now I will introduce you to the notion of Nash equilibrium, which will be boring for some people who are very familiar with it. But for others, again, it's a very, in context like this, Nash equilibrium is very, very simple. A Nash equilibrium in a context like this is a very natural equilibrium idea. It is a choice of action on the part of, I'm seeing in front of me, Anirban chooses an action, Chitresh chooses an action. If after making this choice, each one of them feels, given the other person's choice, I have no reason to change mine. And Chitresh feels, given Anirban's choice, I have no reason to change mine. Then this pair of choices is an equilibrium. No one will move out of that. Very easy to see. In this game, there is only one equilibrium. Take a look at this, stare at this. If both of them are choosing C, is this an equilibrium? The answer immediately is, if both of them are choosing C, check what this person can do, player one. If player one switches from C to A, the outcome goes there. Player one earns $108 instead of $106. So C is not an equilibrium because player one will defect. In fact, player two will defect as well. So CC cannot be sustained. There's only one box which can be sustained. I don't know if you can see that immediately. Let me, since I happen to have a little bit of color. BB is the Nash equilibrium. And in fact, in a game like this, this is the only sensible equilibrium. this society is going to stabilize at BB. Both of them will choose B. They will get $104 each. Now the Samaritan's curse game asks the following question. You can, for a moment, switch off from the board. Let me explain to you. This is the way we write down games. This is the way much of economics works. Individuals look at their own payoffs. They take their own decisions. But occasionally we do say that, look, don't be so selfish. Think of the action, what effect your action has on other people. Today, in the context of environmental problems, we keep pointing out that, look, think a little bit. You do something which for you is fine. You inject smoke into the air. But when everyone does that, it makes society worse off and our future generations worse off. So learn to change your behavior depending on the effect it has on other people. So the way I tell the story in the paper is a good Samaritan comes to town and tells these two rich people that, look, you are playing this game fine to maximize your own welfare. Both of you are rich. You typically earn around $100, which is a huge amount of money. But do you ever think for a moment that the actions you are choosing very often can have an effect on poor people, bystanders? You all are putting up factories. A, B, and C could be setting up a coal factory, doing mining, etc. These things have effects on bystanders. Do you ever think of that? And like all characters in game theory, these players say, no, we never think of that. We do it for ourselves. But the good Samaritan comes and tells them that, look, you must learn to pay attention to the fallout on the bystander. And with that, what the Samaritan does is the Samaritan draws attention to the effect that their behavior has on a third person. I will deliberately assume that there is only one bystander. You can make it 100, 1,000,000, it does not matter. But one person who's very poor, who has no discretion of his or her own, this poor person's welfare depends on what these two rich people do. If they choose BB, the poor person gets something. If they choose AA, the poor person gets something else. And this is the fallout on the poor person. I will write down here. What I'm writing down so that you understand is, if these players 1 and 2 choose AA, the number I write here is the amount of number of dollars that this poor person gets. Let me see, I've got it right. Yes. So this is what the poor person gets as a fallout, which means when these two people play the game, standard way people play games, what the poor person ends up with is $6. So this good Samaritan, the good moral person who comes, and this is the kind of moral that I would share, comes in and tells these people that, look, this person is abysmally poor. To have a welfare income level less than $20 is grinding poverty. You people are so rich. If you were willing to sacrifice $2, instead of $104, you get $102 each. This person would jump up from $6 to $20, from abysmal poverty to moderate poverty. Surely you should take into account their welfare. And the Good Samaritan goes away. And let's say that people are persuaded. They become moral creatures. And the morality of the kind of morality that I'm bringing in is the following. That these people decide that the two players A and B, from now on, yes, I am concerned about my own welfare, and I don't care about what another rich person does, but I am concerned also about the poor person's well-being. And let me put in the following kind of, this is a special case, but I could generalize it. Let's say that the morality that I use is, I will treat a $1 earned by a poor person like a $1 earned by me. So from now on, my calculation of wealth, my welfare, I become a moral creature, is along with my own dollars, I'm also paying attention to the dollar that the poor person earns, not the rich person. So when both of them become moral in this sense, this is a sort of one kind of utilitarianism. As you know, in utilitarianism, you're supposed to give everyone's utility or dollar the same value. I'm not suggesting that. In fact, I'm not even sure I morally find that attractive. But some special value to the people who are suffering, their suffering is important, and that's the kind of morality I'm using. Sort of a variant of utilitarianism. So what happens now? After these people get this moral lecture and the Samaritan goes away, this game converts to a new game as follows. Are you all seeing it? Yeah. Let me save a little bit of my chalk. Whenever inside a box, both players get the same number, here I will write just one number since both of them are getting that. So let me do it now. So when the players become moral, remember now what the payoffs will look like. If both of them choose A, player one gets a utility not of $102, because player one now adds on the utility of the poor person. So treats this as both of them view this outcome as $120. My 102 and the poor person's 20. That's the satisfaction I get. I'm a moral creature. Can you tell me what will be the payoff that 104 will become? So this has become 120, 120. Instead of writing it twice, I've just written it once. Earlier it was 104, 104. Now can you see it will be 110 for both. $6 gets added on. Here, I was getting 106. The other person was getting 106, but now I value this at 110. I hope I don't want to slip in a typo. Let me just keep track of the payoffs. Yeah, that gave me a bit of a surprise. I didn't realize both of these were the same payoff. Okay. And now let's fill up these, and let me fill. This one is easy. 108, there's nothing to add. The person gets nothing over here. And let me now get this one straight. 80, 120 now becomes, is that clear? Stop me if you get stuck on anything. And this is symmetrically opposite. And this, let me go in over here, 80, 102 becomes so this is the new game. I'm just making sure I'm perfectly capable of slipping in a typo even in the middle of this. It's correct. Okay. Now, when they have become moral creatures and playing the game again, and they are playing the game like people play the game, what is the Nash equilibrium? Let's just check it out. Earlier, this was the Nash equilibrium, $104, $104. Will B be, I'm very sorry, will B constitute a Nash equilibrium? And the answer is no. Can you see this is not an equilibrium? Because at least one of them can do better by deviating. If player one deviates from B to C, instead of 110, player one will get 112. So this is no longer a Nash equilibrium. Where will this society settle down at? Could they settle down at AA, the outcome that they are after? The answer is no. If they were at AA, one of them will switch to B to get 124 instead of 120. The only equilibrium is, which means the new Nash equilibrium, after the players become moral, they begin to value the poor person's well-being. the poor person's becomes worse off. Moral creatures take the group to an even more immoral outcome. The original outcome was immoral enough. Instead of 20, this person was getting 6, and now the outcome is even more immoral. That is the Samaritan's curse game. What does it show? And I feel it shows something quite important in real life, with lots of illustrations once you begin to think about it. And there is a lot to do to, I'm getting the glare in my eyes, so I'll turn it around. I will need the blackboard a little bit more later, very little bit more later, and I'll come back to it. This underlying story is, I think, important because it illustrates the sort of what the prisoner's dilemma does for individual rationality, that every individual trying to do well for himself or herself ends up doing worse for all of them is possible. We know this from the prisoner's dilemma. It's standard. What this game shows is that actually, even in the moral domain, we have that problem. Every person being moral can end up by making the group behave even more immorally. You don't want to pardon, of course, the worst leaders, but I mean, when I look at the international domain, occasionally I think, because to me, the North Korea is like a fictitious land. It is a strange country where the actions are dreadful. That is coming out from the top. I mean, they oppress their own people, but the people of North Korea have been brainwashed to the point that they think that all the information coming from all over the world is made up information, that North Korea is a country which is doing very well, but we know that it's a tragic country. Everyone lined up behind the small leadership group. But even here, occasionally it does strike me that can we really, for this reason, think of all the leaders, Kim Jong-un and others, as immoral? And you have to allow for the fact that they may not be. They can also be caught in their own trap, is a possibility. What they are doing is dreadful to their own people, but it is possible that Kim Jong-un is terrified that if he does something else, someone else will do something dreadful to him. And that other person is scared. So collectively, the leadership behaves drastically. But individually, there's nothing that anyone can do. It's a possibility. I'm not saying this is always the case. This is the language of just thinking the pros and cons. It's possible. And North Korea is, I always take this to be the iconic country of ultimately the whole society is organized, brainwashed and organized around the leader. Disastrous success, failure, but where is the moral responsibility? And there can be difficult questions. We are too quick and easy to point fingers and say, this is the morally responsible person. That person could be, but that person also need not be. Like in this case, you can say, who is the immoral person paying no attention to the poor person? Actually, neither of them. Both of them are moral creatures. And by virtue of being moral, they are behaving worse than they would have done otherwise. That is the Samaritan's curse. What do you do about it? In my paper, it's a chit chat. I leave it in the end. It's without a proper answer, but I will give you a little bit of an insight into this, and then I will take about 10, 15 minutes on the leadership and I'll be done. The typical thing that strikes you is that shouldn't these two people get up and talk to each other and say that, look, we are both moral creatures, but our individual action is doing harm to the society. Yes, that's this kind of thing that you have to do, talk and converse and then decide on a group strategy. But here comes a problem with game theory. In game theory, there is something called the game of life. The game of life, I think it was Ken Binmore, was my teacher at LSE. He was those days a pure maths teacher. Ken Binmore, I think, coined it the game of life. The game of life is a game where once you've described the game of life, there is nothing more to life. That is all there is. Now, it can be argued that if this is the game of life, the Samaritan's curse game is the game of life, that there's nothing more for individuals to do. They have to choose between A, B, and C, and then they get their payoffs. Then the question of talking and persuading the other person is not there. That's not a part of the game of life. And we can legitimately ask, if those options were there, then we should write down the game as a more complex game. You can choose A, B, and C. You can get up and give a speech. You can persuade the other person. But if you say that those things are not a part of the game, you can't do it, then I'm afraid this tragic predicament is the only predicament. But here is the thing. The game of life to me is a philosophically paradoxical and actually an unacceptable concept. It is a bit like in set theory, those who have a maths background. In the olden days, we used to start out on set theory by saying, consider the set of everything, the game of life, everything that is there, set of everything. And then you do your set theory. We know this from Bertrand Russell's work. He ran into a paradox. Bertrand Russell and Whitehead, working on Principia Mathematica, ran into a paradox about sets. And then they realized that the paradox was arising because they had made an assumption without even realizing the assumption that there is something called the set of everything. In reality, there is no such thing as the set of everything. One philosophically deep point, but it is of interest because it was a lawyer. One of the first persons to crack the problem was a lawyer. And I want to just mention this and move out. You know, in any theory that you do, abstract theory, there are always implicit assumptions. In fact, the easiest assumptions to criticize are the explicit assumptions. When, as an economist, I'm writing down a theoretical model, I'll write down axioms. Axiom 1, people have this kind of preference. Axiom 2, transitive preference. Axiom 3, law of diminishing marginal utility is satisfied. Axiom 4, the production function is continuous, etc. We write down the axioms, and then we prove theorems. What we don't realize is that there are also axioms which are embedded in the system that we are not even aware of. Those axioms are taken for granted, so we don't state them. And usually, some of the deepest problems in a profession arises when there is one of those, I've called this somewhere, assumption in the woodwork. This is not an assumption that is written explicitly, an assumption that is presumed by all of us. And I'm not going to go into this in any detail in economics, but these assumptions that we collectively make and we run with, often they are fine. But my view is we always have these implicit assumptions in the woodwork. Occasionally, they run into trouble. One of the world's biggest examples of an implicit assumption which lived with us for hundreds of years is Euclid. Euclid created this phenomenal geometry. Geometry is one of my first really intellectually inspiring interactions in school. I love it, the axiomatic structure. Euclid wrote down these axioms, and then you learn that this is what the Pythagoras theorem will be there, etc. Pythagoras, of course, the theorem was pre-Euclid, but the Euclidean geometry with its axiom set was developed by Euclid. Many years later, looking at his axiom about the parallel postulate, people began to realize that there is probably something wrong with Euclid, in the sense that Euclid, not something wrong, but Euclid has implicit assumptions which were never stated explicitly as an axiom. So if you apply Euclidean geometry to some place where that axiom is violated, that assumption in the woodwork is violated, you will run into big problems. The realization was Euclid throughout was assuming that everything is happening on a flat surface. But if you are doing Euclidean geometry, say on a sphere, like the Earth, on the surface of the Earth, some of the Euclidean axioms would not go through. In particular, the parallel lines axiom would not be valid anymore. And if you develop a Euclidean geometry for flat surfaces and then you begin to apply it on a world which is spherical, you will make some disastrous mistakes. Fortunately, Euclid's implicit assumption of a flat surface was discovered before, well, not before really the flying and the sort of the world was hyper connected, because then we would run into problems, but it was discovered. It's usually associated, the discovery is with the German mathematician Gauss. But what I recently discovered, interestingly, that there was another group of people who were virtually getting onto this problem, and there is a lawyer involved called Ferdinand Karl Schweikart. I've just encountered the work by Ferdinand Karl Schweikart a little bit before Gauss. Then he met Gauss. He was a lawyer who was a practicing lawyer, then became a professor of law, then used to play around with geometry. And it struck him that Euclid was making use of an implicit assumption, and he tried to create a new geometry, which he called the astral geometry. And I also actually discovered, since I'm reading about this, that Omar Khayyam, the poet, Rubaiyats of Omar Khayyam, was virtually onto this problem of Euclid. This was, Omar Khayyam means, I hope I'm not getting it wrong, 11th century or something. Omar Khayyam was, had a sense of this and had written down little mathematical formulas trying to grapple with this. What I'm trying to inspire you is that many of these deepest problems are not really problems meant for mathematicians doing very narrow focused mathematics. It's meant for anyone with an interest in the world, interest in logic and deductive reasoning. And this Samaritan's paradox is pushing our attention to assumptions beneath the surface in game theory, that there are many other things that people can do. We maybe have to make room for that. There is one more thing I'll say, and I want to move on because I do want to stop in another 10 minutes. I also in this paper talk about conferred morality, which is there are situations in life where something is not moral or immoral innately, but we may want to confer an immorality to this action. We may say this action should be treated as immoral. We may make a law which declares this action as not legal, and that gradually confers a morality on this. I argue in this paper towards the end that there is need for conferred morality, even while we know that there is nothing immoral about a certain action. We may gradually make it out to be immoral to undertake that action. A very simple example, driving on the road in a country with no laws, whether you drive on the left or drive on the right, it's up to you. There's no law. But let us suppose that you bring in a law saying that everyone should drive on the left, and the law gradually picks up, people begin to do that. It is possible to argue that after the law has come in, if you suddenly lurch to the right-hand side of the road to overtake someone and cause an accident, it is not just a violation of the law, but it is an immoral thing to do. This morality of driving on the left is not an innate morality, but it is a morality that has been conferred by the law. And my paper ends with a discussion of two topics: the role of conferred morality and the meaning of a game and the philosophically open questions, no solution over there. Let me stop on that paper. I want to take 10 minutes on work that I'm doing right now. It's unpublished, and I'm in the middle of this. Rajesh or Chitrakalpo, tell me if I push it for another 15 minutes, will that be all right?
That would be wonderful. Please.
Okay, I won't exceed 15 minutes, but let me tell you what the story is. I don't know whether I will also use the blackboard. Most of this actually I can tell you in words. The power of the leader, all these kinds of storytelling that I'm doing, the game and the big literature on this, the leader's role never comes up. I've recently been doing some work on the role of the leader and what does it mean to be a leader. Hobbes, the philosopher Hobbes, took the view that you need not only a leader, you need an authoritarian leader at the top of the country, the Leviathan, who leads the country with an iron hand. And that is what gives order. Without that, life would be nasty, brutish, and short. Solitary, nasty, brutish, and short was Hume's description. On the other hand, if you think of the power of the leader, why is the leader so powerful? Beyond a point, there is very little that the leader can do by himself or herself. And this is what Havel's work was pointing to. And I can, maybe the best way to explain this problem is with Havel's analogy. Havel says that you're living in a country with a dreadful authoritarian leader. Ordinary people are suffering. He's describing Czechoslovakia. He never names Czechoslovakia. He is under house arrest at that time. And again, it's the marvelous character. No, let me finish before I jump into Havel's character. Let me give you the story fully just now. So the analysis fully, Havel is giving a bit of a description of the authoritarianism of his country. And he says that, look, this is a very strange authoritarianism. On second thoughts, it's not strange. All authoritarianism is actually that. And David Hume knew this. But Havel over here about Czechoslovakia says, look, if you look at an ordinary greengrocer selling onions and tomatoes and whatever in a grocery store, puts up a poster, which is a declaration of loyalty to this dreadful authoritarian government. And Havel says, if you're an outsider, and if you see this greengrocer showing loyalty to this leader, you may think that this person is loyal to the leader. But Havel says, no, I know this country very well. The greengrocer is not loyal. The greengrocer is mimicking loyalty for fear that if the greengrocer does not show loyalty, others will harass the greengrocer. The party goons will come and begin to harass the greengrocer. And that's the reason why the greengrocer is pretending loyalty. And this is true from the big industrialist to the greengrocer. They are mimicking loyalty to this awful actual leader in the country. And then Havel goes on to ask that, what about the party goons who harass the greengrocer? Why are they harassing the greengrocer if the greengrocer is disloyal? Is it because the party goons are so loyal to the regime? Havel says, no, I know this country very well. Even the party goons are not loyal. They are harassing the greengrocer who is disloyal for the same reason that the greengrocer is displaying loyalty. If you don't harass someone who is disloyal, then you will be considered disloyal. And then you are scared others will harass you. And it is this collective fear that locks people into this dreadful behavior, which props up the regime of the dreadful control. And we, in many sense, we are all victims. Each of us are oppressed, and we are also the oppressors because we are collectively sustaining the regime. That is the description of Havel. This paper becomes a classic paper subsequently. And David Hume, writing in 1758, Hume is one of the greatest thinkers. You can see Hume describing this problem almost perfectly. It's game theory without the use of modern game theoretic concepts about how in the end we are all victims. But then that leads me to a question. What role does the leader play? And I take the view in this paper that I'm writing now, that in the end, the leader does not have to be powerful enough, physically muscular enough. The leader has to create cues and signals which get ordinary people to change their beliefs about one another. And that then traps the system into this dreadful regime. The two footnotes that I had bypassed, let me bring this in. Havel, in his honest description of what he was writing, his belief in it, it is known that when Havel was under house arrest with these dreadful Czechoslovakian soldiers, the totalitarian regime soldiers posted outside his home, Havel would say that I actually don't blame these soldiers. They are victims of this regime. And there are now accounts of Havel calling these soldiers in and saying, come in and have a cup of tea with me. Havel, under house arrest, would invite the soldiers in to come and sit with him and have a cup of tea because Havel felt they are victims of the system. So this, I wanted to push this aside. Actually, let me skip other footnotes because I want to go ahead and explain a little bit more of this that I'm saying. Now, what is the meaning of this leader being able to create changing other people's beliefs? The leader can create focal points. And from this and the last 7-8 minutes, I will just give you a brief discussion of focal points. I've written a full book where I now believe that the way we do law and economics should be based on focal points critically. It's almost like rewriting the doing of law and economics. And the leader's role is the role of the creator of focal points. That's it. I will leave it with that, but let me explain the notion of the focal point for you very briefly. How will I do it? Okay, let me do it with this. The question that I raised in the book on the new way of doing law and economics is the following, that think of the power of the law. When a new law comes in, it changes our behavior. Like Well, it often changes our behavior. There are also places where it does not, but there are places where the law changes our behavior. And I'm asking the question, why does it change our behavior? So suppose that there is a law that says that you can't drive faster than, say, 100 kilometers per hour. When you go from Chandigarh to Delhi, there is a speed limit law. Now, let me begin with no speed limit law. So every time you go from Chandigarh to Delhi, no speed limit law, you make your own calculations. What is the safe speed to drive at? And you want to reach on time, weigh the pros and cons, and you decide you're going to drive at 110 kilometers per hour in the free parts of Delhi-Chandigarh road. Now let us suppose a new law comes in, which says that no one is allowed to drive faster than 100 kilometers per hour. That affects, in many countries, that will affect people's behavior. People will begin to drive slower than 100 kilometers per hour. Why so? If you use the standard law and economics argument, the argument that goes back to the work of Gary Becker in the 1960s, the line that you will take is you change your behavior because your payoffs change. When you drive at 110 kilometers per hour, before the law, you were thinking of the risk of there being a skid, of injury. You would save time by going fast, but you would lose. There was a risk that there'd be an accident, etc. You took a decision. But now, with the law, your payoff has changed. Why? Because now you're aware that if you drive faster than 100 kilometers per hour, you may be stopped by a policeman and fined. So over and above the previous calculations, there's a new calculation that you may have to pay a fine that changes your payoff function. But if you think very hard, the game of life, bring in the police person also into this, it's not clear why will the policeman behave differently after the law has been brought in. You can say the policeman will behave differently because if the policeman does not enforce the law, the judge will punish him. But then you can ask the question, why will the judge punish him? Our point is, if everybody collectively looks away from the law does nothing. In the end, the law is just a few sentences written down on paper. Why does law change behavior? My view now is law changes behavior. This sounds mystical, but I don't think it's mystical at all. It's something very concrete, something that can be given shape. The law changes behavior because the law changes my expectation of another person's behavior, another person's expectation of my behavior. The law does not change the game. It changes our beliefs about one another. So it's a little bit of ink on paper. It does not change the game, but it changes our behavior because it changes my expectation of what you are thinking, belief about what I'm thinking. I'll give one example. On paper can begin to change behavior. This is not a payoff matrix. I'm calling this game the squares game. I have this game in my book. The squares game is as follows. A whole lot of people have to play this game. Whole bunch of people. Imagine all my audience, all of you people are playing this game. Each of you will have to choose one square, any square you can choose. If you choose the same square, I will give you 1,000 rupees. If everybody chooses the same square, I will give you 1,000 rupees. Otherwise, if you choose different squares, you will get 0. That is the game. So you're playing this game. Let us say there are 100 of you, 100 players. And the game, again, the rule is you have to choose a square and just tell me, whisper into my ear. If all of you choose the same square, you will get 1,000 rupees. If you choose different squares, you will get nothing. Play this game, and I've done it in my class. It will be all over the place. Some will choose this, hoping everyone will choose this. Some will choose this, hoping everyone else will choose this. It goes. There are some clusters, but it's all over. Now, I'm going to put some ink on paper. I'm not going to change the game. I just literally rub in a little bit of ink on paper. I can write some words. I need not write some words. I have put in a little bit of ink on that square. And you asked me that, so what does that do to the game? I said nothing. Yes, of course, you can, all of you can see this, that one square has ink on it, but the game is exactly the same. Choose any square. Ignore the ink if you want. In fact, ignore the ink for the rules of the game. Choose any square. If you choose the same, you will all get 1,000 rupees. If you choose a different square, if everyone doesn't choose the same square, you will get 0. Play this game, and I can, if you think hard and the group plays the game, I can assure you what the outcome will be. Virtually everyone will choose the square. This little bit of ink on paper does not change the game, but it changes the play of the game. Why? Because my expectation of your behavior, your expectation of my behavior, everyone expects everyone else to choose the square. My belief is, in the end, the law does nothing but create a focal point like this. The focal point is an idea that goes to Thomas Schelling, but if you read David Hume, he's virtually there. I mean, he doesn't have the game theoretic equipment, but he understands. And David Hume points out that in the end, the force of law, the force of the power of the leader is the ability to create focal points. Just through hints and suggestions, you create focal points, and that affects people's behavior. And this leads me to questions in my paper. If you want, this is a paper which is an unpublished paper which I'm working on. I'll be happy to send it to Chitrakalpo, and you can share it with others. I then go on to talk about Donald Trump as example, that what was he doing? This rioting that took place on January 6th. At one level, Trump can say, look, I was never telling people that go out there and vandalize and do that. But through his language, etc., he had created a focal behavior whereby everyone was expecting one another to behave in certain ways. And it's that chilling hint of bad behavior which got the collectivity moving. I will end with one quotation from Michael Cohen, who was a key advisor to Donald Trump. And then when Michael Cohen felt that it is intolerable being a supporter of a leader of this kind, and he backtracked, Trump went after him. And the way he goes after him is like a focal leader does. And it says, the president of the United States, this is Michael Cohen's recent book, the president of the United States wanted me dead. Or let me say it the way Donald Trump would. He wouldn't mind if I were dead. That's all Donald Trump would say. Like a mob boss, using language carefully calibrated to convey his desires and demands, while at the same time employing deliberate indirection to insulate himself and avoid actual ordering a hit on his former personal attorney. Michael Cohen was his attorney, confidant, and at least in my heart, adopted son, like an adopted son. So that is the way that the power of the leader, it's the creation of the focal point which changes people's beliefs about one another, which causes it. Then arises the question of the moral responsibility of the leader. I've gone over my time. I'm not spending any more on that. And I will point out that I once again feel you have to be very careful. We cannot jump and immediately hold the leader morally responsible, because sign languages and hints are sign languages and hints. And who knows, I may be wrong, that the leader may not have wanted what people read as sign language from the leader. So you have to allow for that. Even with the worst forms of leadership, keep your mind open to the possibility that the leader may be a victim of a context and a situation. But this is a problem which I think is game theoretically interesting. As moral philosophy, it's interesting. And in the end, in life, we have to take decisions. And lawyers all the time take decisions. Was Trump responsible for the rioting on the Capitol or not? I do believe he's responsible. But the details of that, the Brandenburg versus Ohio case, you redo that, and there are new conclusions you reach. And my paper goes into these kinds of details. In the end, actually talking about the January 6th event. But I've gone on for much longer than I had planned to. Let me stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Basu. It was an absolute treat. We would have loved if you continued even longer. It's really wonderful, and it's a bit. I would say I was struggling to basically connect this with your initial disclaimer that this was not based on today's reality, or it's not connected to today's, because everything you said here seemed so connected to today's reality. So it's so thank you, an absolute treat, sir. Thanks a lot. Let me turn to the Q&A, the questions there. I think the Q&A page is visible to all of us. But let me see if I can edit or pick a few questions for you.
Dr. Chakra, if you allow,
yes, okay. Please.
Thank you so much, Professor Basu, for this fantastic lecture. I just have one question. So, is there any way? I mean, some higher power, I would say, that when you're talking about a leader, then who's the higher power? That's a question. Can push the stable but suboptimal equilibrium to another stable but optimum equilibrium, the top left corner of your payoff matrix. Is it possible? Like,
yeah. So tell me if I'm addressing what you're trying to ask. Is that when you get a suboptimal outcome, there will be some games where, if someone is a leader, in the sense that what that person says immediately affects people's beliefs, there are some games where that person has the power to take the society to the better outcome. Because by making a statement, you can have people move over to the optimal equilibrium. If you can, so in game theory, it's very clear. In a clean situation like that, I would hold the leader morally responsible. You, through statements, you could have moved society to that outcome, optimal outcome. You did not make those statements. So if you bring in the statements of the leader as a part of the larger game that the leader speaks, and that triggers action, and there is an optimal outcome, which it's true, currently the players are locked in a bad outcome. But if the leader makes some statements, you can make people move there. Yes, I hold that as the moral responsibility of the leader. And one example I have in the paper, which is very troubling to me, again, to get a full answer. Suppose in an orchestra, there is an orchestra going on, and the conductor is swinging the baton, and the music, beautiful music, is emanating from there. Let us suppose that in the front row, a lady with long hair takes out her long comb and begins to comb her hair. She's doing it not for no other purpose but to comb her hair. But somehow the musicians, instead of looking at the baton of the conductor, they start looking at her long comb, and the music gets messed up in this orchestra because they are playing by the music of her combing her hair, which is dreadful music. The question is the lady morally responsible for messing up the music? Suppose she's not at all, her intention was not to do that. She doesn't want to be the leader of the orchestra. Is she responsible? Tricky question. Now, in case, just her saying, I was not wanting to mess up the music. I was trying to comb my hair. My point is that even if she doesn't want to do that, if she's aware that her action will do it, the awareness should be more important than intention. In the American law, intention is always held prime, because in the famous Brandenburg versus Ohio case, which is coming up a lot now in Donald Trump's context, the question is, was Donald Trump's intention to do that? But from the orchestra lady's example, you can see that intention is one thing. But even if that particular thing is not your intention, if you're aware that your action can do that, you're morally responsible. If you're not even aware, yes, you're not morally responsible. Long answer, Chitrababu, to your question.
Yeah, so I mean, the theater, the orchestra, they can put up a sign outside that no combing inside the theater, no combing of hair inside the theater, right? So I mean, is it possible that the law, just tells the leaders that you can't say this, right? So this will create unnecessary change in the focal point,
Yeah. So then,
or the constitution maybe.
so what you're pointing out is with every behavior, you can think of something prior, which, like in this case, the lady is combing of the hair. Then you say that why didn't whoever organizes this orchestra put up a sign outside saying no combing hair with long, and that person then is responsible for not putting up the sign. Now, again, will arise the same kind of question. The chief of the organizer of this, the boss of this orchestra, not the conductor, but the CEO of the orchestra, will say, I never thought that this contingency would arise. Someone would be combing the hair with a long. And then you could ask a prior question. Then the government should have had the statement that in orchestras you do this. So there is a bit of an infinite regress problem that a prior and a prior and a prior that you go into. In the end, when you take decisions in real life, I don't think you can ever solve these problems fully because there are always implicit assumptions. At some point, you cut off the chain and say, I hold this person responsible. But at least if we have clarity in our head, we'll be a bit more moral, we'll be a bit more correct in taking these decisions.
Thank you, Professor Basu. That answers my question. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So let me look at the questions here. It seems several of the questions are related to the description of the game on the board, and some of them may be related to that error of that AAA instead of ABC out there. Okay, this is an interesting one. I don't know how you have. It's an anonymous attendee. You have mentioned the prominence of David Hume before the development of contemporary game theory. Can you tell us how Hume might have played a role in the shaping of modern game theory?
I really don't think Hume played any role. The arrival of modern game theory goes back very far. Some people will take Emile Borel's theorem, which is exactly 100 years ago from now, as the creation. Some people will consider, I usually, when I give my lectures, I use a theorem on chess that was proved in 1912 as the start of game theory, but intuitive ideas, interactive ideas were there before that. So many people treat game theory as arising out of literally of boardroom games. People were playing chess and bridge for a long time, and they were beginning to think in terms of, this is the strategy, that is the strategy, that's the birth of game theory. Then, of course, everyone knows the name of John Nash from 1950 to 1953. Before John Nash's schizophrenia became acute by the age of 28. John Nash lost his mind altogether. But before the age of 28, John Nash made these huge contributions. Hume's thing is the following. I find in Hume many ideas at an intuitive level, just being a very, very deep thinker, that if you sit down, lie down, keep thinking of something, the conclusion you'll reach, you find that Hume has thought. And the one on power is the following. Hume is contesting a little bit of Hobbes's position by saying that, when we talk about the leader's power, we almost believe that that leader has so much strength that you will be scared. But in the end, Hume points out that in the end, the leader can do only this much. You are scared of that because what others will do to you. And others will do that to you because others are scared of what others will do to you. So he's using the language of game theory, that it is a self-fulfilling situation which traps us collectively in an equilibrium, but never really in the form of game theory. Rajesh, as you're saying, as you certainly know, the clear precursor to John Nash in game theory was in 1838, Cournot writing down the notion of an equilibrium was Nash equilibrium. He was writing down. So Hume had these broad general ideas very, very correctly done, and which is a precursor more to Thomas Schelling's focal point, rather than Nash's equilibrium that was there in David Hume.
Thank you. A few quick questions here, but quick, but maybe deep too. One again from an anonymous attendee says, sir, what is your opinion on the morality of meritocracy? You want to take it, or you can skip it and move to something else?
It depends a little. Morality of meritocracy, I don't quite understand what you mean by that. Is it that should the meritocracy have power to make decisions, if that is what you're asking? I'm assuming that that is what you're asking. This is the answer I will give. This is, once again, a dilemma. Life is full of dilemmas. If you hand over a lot of decision making to people with the merit and with the expertise, you have one gain, that these are people who have the ability to understand. But if you hand it over to them, you are running a risk that they can hijack the system in their own interest. So there are never very clear solutions. You hand over the power of the nation altogether to a meritorious group, in the sense that they have the intellectual skill to solve the problems. Yes, in life, we do need people with intellectual skills to solve today's complex problems, and examples galore. I can give examples from India, where you would do much better if you put your mind to the design of the system for the same thing that you're trying to do. I mean, Rajesh in the beginning mentioned my work on corruption that I had done in Government of India, which had caused a lot of problem for Manmohan Singh, because I had gone on public and made that statement. But there I was doing exactly that. I was just trying to point out that, look, there are these intricate problems. We do want to get rid of corruption, but just by chanting and saying you want to get rid of corruption, you may end up making bigger mistakes. You will damage the economy hugely by trying to remove corruption through some wrong moves, whereas you need this kind of intricate thinking to do that. But there is a risk. If you leave it to people like me to make these decisions, I believe I am moral enough that I would never do something immorally at the top. But there are immoral people with merit and expertise who will hijack the system and go for their own. So once again, I'm afraid this is an area where I'm giving you no final answers, because there are no final answers, but it is something that we have to contend with. You can't do without meritocracy, but to hand it all over to the hand of the meritocracy is also risky.
Great. There is a question from Arpan Chakraborty. Said, sir, if the payoff game that you have shown in the lecture is played repeated times, does the Samaritan's curse hold?
Arpan, I have not done it with repeated play, but I'm close to certain that though I've done it for a specific example, it's almost like the prisoner's dilemma for individual rationality. It is true that the prisoner's dilemma, if you begin to repeat it, the bad outcome can cease to be there. You will also have a good outcome. We know from subgame perfection that a repeated play of the prisoner's dilemma can take you to a good outcome. So I'm sure that can happen. But we also know from the prisoner's dilemma that the bad outcome still sustains. So you get multiple equilibria. We know from folk theorem, you get multiple equilibria, you can get a good outcome by repetition, but the bad outcome remains. I'm pretty sure if you work with my game and begin to repeat it, you'll get something similar. You will get a class of equilibria. The good outcome is possible where the morally good outcome happens, but the morally bad outcome will probably continue to sustain. I have not done it as a repeated game, but that is my hunch. It's worth exploring that.
Great. The next question is from Shetoshri Roy. Says, would you suggest that having a focal point is the key to success for a leader in any group? Or would you suggest leaders supporting establishment and one leading the anti-establishment group should have a focal point also? I think this is getting slightly complicated, but maybe the summary of this question is, can leaders lead without a focal point approach? Do counter anti-establishment groups also need to create their own focal points? How do focal points lead to political?
In the end, focal points play a crucial role. And I should tell you that leadership is, in the end, I feel, in the end, a case of focal points. You have to create that when you say something that triggers people's beliefs about one another. That is what leadership is. But Revolt against leadership is also the creation of a focal point. Václav Havel was doing that. He was pointing to the fact that the country is trapped in a miserable focal point. You've got an obviously tyrannical leader, and people's beliefs are such that they are cowering under that leader. You have to break out of it. What did he do? At one level, Havel made the sacrifice of being a focal leader. Gandhi was a focal leader. People who are beginning to coalesce around the statements made by Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi, that became a leader. So the opposition, when it coalesces, that's also a creation of a focal point. But here is a bit of a warning. In any game, when you have multiple focal points, it should immediately be obvious you will initially get chaos, because the whole power of the focal point is everyone knows that it is that painted square is where everyone else is going. When you get a new focal point arising, some people will think everyone is going to the new focal point, and others will think that you're going to this focal point, and there will be chaos. But there's a beautiful description from literature and history, Haile Selassie's story, as told by Reitzad Kapuscinski, that when Selassie was the authoritarian leader of Ethiopia, it seemed that he had hundreds and thousands of loyal people. And then but brutal regime, absolutely. He's treating his ordinary own people very badly, but he seems to have a loyal cadre below him. But this is a beautiful, lyrically written, because he also wrote so beautifully. Kapuscinski describes that after Haile Selassie falls, within weeks, the loyal servants disappear. And suddenly you feel that there was no one that was loyal to this huge, dreadful monarch. And the reason is, it is the vacuousness of the focal point. The focal point is very powerful, but at one level it is vacuous. Once a new focal point gets created and this one crashes, it can crash very, very rapidly and vanish altogether.
Wow. And this is a feet of clay situation. When it collapses, something that was a widely held regime suddenly disappears, and we have seen this play out in so many countries and places. Thank you so much, Professor. I would invite Anirban to propose a vote of thanks and share some concluding thoughts. Anirban and Chitrakalpa have been the architects of this series, and we have had fabulous speakers here. Most notably, Professor Pranab Bardhan and Professor Kenneth French have also been in this series. So, what a wonderful thing for us to have you, Professor Basu. Anirban, you want to come share your thoughts?
Absolutely, Dr. Chakravarti. Thank you. And I really don't know what to say. Like, thanking you, I don't want to demean you by just thanking you, but I will just go ahead and say that our center, the reputation, the credibility, whatever, the prestige of our center went up manifold this evening. Thank you so much, Dr. Basu. It was an absolute honor to host you as a part of this inspiration series. I would also love to like to thank Dr. Rajesh Chakravarti for moderating, for agreeing to moderate this session. Chitrakalpa, well, this session wouldn't have happened without you. Thank you so much. Meenakshi, Chitresh, and everybody else who are part of the center needs to be profusely thanked. And last but not the least, the audience. Without you, without the fantastic, intelligent questions that you asked, well, it would have this talk definitely wouldn't have reached the level that it reached this evening. So once again, and of course, how can I forget Vikash? Thanks for all the IT support. So once again, thank you so much, Dr. Basu. It was an absolute honor. And I hope to, or we from the Center for Research in Emerging Economics hope to host you in person someday when this pandemic finally decides to leave us. But till then, maybe we'll host you one more time in Zoom if you have the time and if you agree to it. But for today, it was like, I'll cherish this memory, I don't know for how long, probably for the rest of my life. And last but not the least, on a very personal note, Dr. Basu, when you meet Diksha, please let her know that I loved Windfall. A lot of people in this group probably won't understand what I'm saying, but you sure will. So that's pretty much it. And thank you very much for attending. Thank you very much, Dr. Basu. Dr. Chakravarti, do you have any closing remarks?
I just want to add to your thanks, and let me say that it's not just on behalf of the center, but on behalf of the school and indeed the university. It's a rare honor for us to host a scholar of your stature, Professor Basu, and what a talk it has been. I think it has got our own thinking moving in so many ways, and I'm sure many of us are going to start reading new things. And every time we hear you anywhere, I can actually, maybe it's too late. If it's not too late, I can just say a few years back, you gave a talk, and you must have forgotten about it, at ISI Delhi, one of those conferences that the Trideep organizes every winter. And I think you were still the chief economic advisor at that point. You made a remark which has stayed with me, and I have not really understood it fully. And if I had even caught what you said literally, I must be making a mistake doing that. About why do we do research? It was as a young scholar, we have lots of reasons to do research, very, very material ones for most of us. But you had asked that question that why do we do research? And I think the answer that you said, and I say this with some hesitation because I may have either forgotten it or misunderstood you at that point, was that it was ultimately about aesthetics. And it was ultimately about beauty at some level. And that thought, I cannot claim to have grasped that idea wholly, but it has stayed with me, and I often go to that notion and try to sort of understand it and whatever. So if you have a couple of minutes, if you remember what I'm saying, I may have spoken completely wrongly here and may have misunderstood you entirely, but I don't know if you want to just cap that, because it has been such a profound thought for me.
That is certainly that I do believe that in the end, the inspiration for research is the pursuit of beauty, in the sense that when someone composes music or when you paint, it is a pursuit of beauty in the sense of order, aesthetics, seeing a pattern. And that, I think, is the biggest driver. And the byproduct of goodness that comes out of it, you discover on things, is really a byproduct. So at one level, of course, in your spare time, you want to do things which will directly contribute. But the biggest driver when you're doing research is like when you're composing music. It is, you're just trying to get the most interesting, exciting pattern out, to see pattern in chaos. I mean, it's a beauty of a certain kind where something at first sight looks chaotic. Then you keep staring at it and you begin to see that there are patterns in there. And I feel that is really the ultimate pursuit of research, is doing exactly that. And whether that is seeing pattern in big data, looking at masses of data, and you begin to see that a pattern emerge, or theory, where theory is also in some sense data. You observe everyday life, people's behavior, and then you want to bring it all together in one sort of structure, one sort of organized, almost like a flower pot, which looks very beautiful with different components. Yes. I don't remember the exact word, but I'm sure I did say something like that, because I do believe in that.
Thank you so much, Professor Basu. We hope to host you again. Thank you, and you have a great day.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Absolutely enjoyed my interaction. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Well, all of you, all my thoughts with you all. Yeah.